Alright my friends, I've shown you a lot of builds that can kill or otherwise take out of action Designated Punching Bag, the Oathbreaker Knight, in the first round of combat. And of course this build can do that as well, but what it can do that those other builds can't is take out the Oathbreaker Knight while also making fun of someone so hard that they literally die. So first, we're going to run over and we're going to use Flick of the Wrist to disarm the Oathbreaker Knight so he can't fight back or interfere. Let's go ahead and add a sneak attack to that. We could also add a smite if we wanted to do more damage, though mostly we're just happy to have him out of the combat. Then we're running over here, and then we're going to mock Volo until he simply can't stand the embarrassment and just drops dead. So firstly, a vicious mockery, and then another vicious mockery. And then finally, yet another vicious mockery. Now, of course, we could do this more times if we needed to, but this was enough to take him out. The sheer shame just felled him. Now, obviously, this isn't the way that this build is going to play out in combat most of the time. You're going to be using your incredible damage, your very high smite damage effects, in order to kill enemies, disarm them, and keep them from fighting back, but I just thought it was really funny that we can viciously mock people 4 times in a round until they drop dead, which this build is great at as well. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today I'll be covering a build I'm calling the Dashing Swordsman, the true picture of roguish charm and piratical allure. This character will dance across the battlefield, turning every fight into a battle of skill and wit, and leaving your enemies tragically disarmed of both. This character does great damage and has great crowd control, and is also one of the best out-of-combat characters in the entire game, with the skills and tools to cover pretty much every situation you might encounter, so it makes a great main character or lead character for a run. We also get to use one of the game's most overpowered subclasses in a way that I think is much more fun and interesting than you usually see it used. And we can customize the character to be more or less powerful to fit the level of challenge that you're looking for, or avoid overshadowing your friends in a co-op run, or, really overshadow them if you just want to show them who's boss. This character loves to show off. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Wayne Sutherland for the $5 donation, Carlos Luchana Moraes for the 50 real, Portilla Bill for the $10, and Laughs in Melanin and Dala for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means so much to me. Alright, let's break some hearts. We're using Astarion as the example character here, because of course this is a rogue build, and he's the rogue of the party, and also from a flavor standpoint, I think this build fits him incredibly well, maybe even better than the monoclass rogue that is his canon class in Baldur's Gate. The Bard levels give you the access to arcane power that he's seeking through his story, and the flashiness fits his personality. He also, from a mechanical standpoint, is an excellent choice, because his ability to hit attacks more often, thanks to his happy buff, and the late game bonus to damage with the number of attacks this character is making both fit excellently. Also, if you're playing Astarion as your main character, as an origin character, when you start the game, you can change his cantrip from Firebolt to Booming Blade, which is a tremendous damage boost for this character. So for all of those reasons, he makes an excellent choice for this build. I also think from a flavor standpoint, Will makes a lot of sense. He's the Blade of Frontiers, and we're going to be doing a lot of blade work with this build, so it just makes perfect sense for his character as well. This character also makes an excellent custom character and party leader, and if you are building it as a custom character, High Elf or High Half Elf for Booming Blade access are probably the strongest races that you can pick. The extra damage is just so powerful. Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf give you extra movement speed, and of course we're rolling tons and tons of dice, so Halfling's ability to reroll ones makes you vastly more consistent. At first level, we actually have a lot of different ways that we could start building the character. If you just want to get your most powerful abilities as quickly as possible, you can rush for those by starting with Bard levels. But what I've found is that the build actually plays out much more smoothly if you start with a level of Rogue. Having expertise in 2 skills right from the beginning of the game means that you just never have to worry about your skill checks for the entirety of the game. So if you start with a level of Rogue, it just makes your whole party so much better at succeeding at everything that you're doing outside of combat. I've found it to be very helpful to begin with that. But if you're building this character at a later level, respeccing into this build, you might want to start with the Bard levels just to maximize your character's power at that point in the game. As a rogue at first level, we don't have a lot of choices that we need to make, but we do get to choose our attribute spread. There's two different ways that you can build this character's attributes. You can either do 16 starting dexterity, 14 constitution, 10 wisdom, and 12 wisdom, and 16 starting charisma. This is the normal attribute split, and it will give you the ability to make your weapon attacks with dexterity and use all of your bard spells and abilities using charisma, as well as our rogue abilities later on. You can also, if you are planning to use Ethel's hair on this character, or for this playthrough, you can start with 17 starting dexterity and use the hair in order to bump your dexterity up to 18. This character benefits tremendously from doing that. There's a lot of cool feats that we can take, so for this build, I'm going to assume that you're starting with 17 and using the hair to boost up to 18. It's not required, but there are so many cool things that you can do if you do that in order to show them off, for this build guide, we're going to follow that build path. For our skill selection, this character is going to handle pretty much every important out-of-combat skill that you have as a party. We're going to start with Sleight of Hand, with expertise in Sleight of Hand, so we can always open any lock or disarm any trap, and expertise in Persuasion. This way, our character can fulfill the two most important out-of-combat functions perfectly, with expertise in both dialogue skills and Sleight of Hand. You just never fail at those things that your character's trying to do. You should also probably get acrobatics proficiency. One thing that can be tough for this character as a low-strength melee character is getting shoved around. Acrobatics helps you avoid that. And then you can put the remaining points into whatever other dialogue skills you want to have access to so that you can make those checks as well. Stealth can be useful, although this isn't a build that's going to be making a lot of stealth checks, but even so, just in case you end up making stealth checks, stealth proficiency can also be very helpful. So this is what I would set up using Astarion. If you have his background, this may differ a little bit if you're using a different background, but a background like a Guild Artisan can be good, that gets you Persuasion and Insight. A background like Urchin can be good to get you Sleight of Hand and Stealth, and then you can set up your skills like this. That's all the decisions that we have to make at level 1 as a rogue. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're immediately multi-classing and hopping over to Bard. Obviously, we want to get our extremely powerful Bard abilities online as quickly as possible, which will be our primary method of dealing damage and controlling enemies, and this also will get us even more skills and out-of-combat options, which makes this character even better at leading and supporting their party. For our cantrip selection, we're going to be taking Vicious Mockery. Now, it's on flavor for this character, and one of the great things that we can do is double mock people later in the game, which is just hilarious. So although it's not the most powerful damage option at this point, you'll have a crossbow or a light crossbow or a hand crossbow that you can use to deal more damage than Vicious Mockery. The control element is still good, and it's just funny, so we definitely want it for this character. We're also going to pick up friends. You should make sure that you have another character in your party that has Minor Illusion, because this is a very important cantrip to have. But this character's a party face, so having friends is very helpful for them as well. For our spell selection at first level, we're going to be taking Healing Word, so that we can support our allies with a bonus action, and Dissonant Whispers, which lets us lock down melee enemies, as well as doing great damage. Our next couple spells are less key. These are the two you're always going to take as a bard at first level, pretty much. But you can mix and match your other spells here. I like having Disguise Self because the utility of Disguise Self is extremely strong, so picking that up on a party face can be very useful. If you don't have another character that has Longstrider, you'll definitely want to grab Longstrider on this character, or you can pick up Tasha's Hideous Laughter as a great control spell that also is extremely relevant with some combinations that we can use later on in the game. We also get an extra skill as a bard, so you can put that into, for example, Insight, to make you a little bit better in conversations. You can also put it in Performance if you feel like it's weird to have a bard that doesn't have access to Performance. And speaking of Performance, of course, as a bard, we need to make certain we pick the right starting instrument, or we're going to ruin our run completely. That's it for level 2. Let's move on to level 3. At character level 3, we're taking a second level of Bard, which gets us Jack of all trades, making us even better at all of the skill checks that we're making. Obviously, this character has low intelligence, and we don't have proficiency in the intelligence skills, unless you're playing as a Githyanki in order to get those proficiencies. But Jack of all trades will still let us sometimes make those intelligence skill checks that we might want to make. And, of course, we're excellent at the skills that we actually do want to make all the time, so the ability to sometimes make those, sometimes make perception checks, is still pretty nice for this character. We also get Song of Rest, which lets us take extra short rests, obviously huge utility for the party overall, and we get to pick an extra spell. What spell you pick here, again, is not critically important, but the most powerful combat option is probably Thunder Wave. It can push enemies away from you if they get on top of you. At this level, we're still not amazing in melee combat, though that will quickly change, but at low levels, when enemies get on top of you, you're probably going to want to push them away with Thunder Wave, so you can keep using your archery in peace. At level 4, we're taking our 3rd level of Bard so that we can take our Bard subclass, which of course is the College of Swords. Swords Bard gives us a tremendous amount of damage, allowing us to spend our inspiration dice in order to use these flourishes. And with Slashing Flourish, we can attack multiple enemies at the same time, which is very powerful. But for this character, the flourishes are, the other flourishes are also extremely useful. Defensive Flourish gives us 4 extra armor class, which is actually extremely powerful for this character. We'll have other ways of boosting our AC, which will allow this character to be extremely hard to hit in fights where that's relevant. And Mobile Flourish gives you both mobility and lets you punt enemies off of cliffs or into hazardous areas, which of course is great as well. When you're playing a melee swords bard, you're much more likely to use all 3 flourishes than when you're playing a ranged swords bard, where you're almost always just going to use Slashing Flourish in order to double your damage output. But as a melee swords bard, you get to do more clever things with those flourishes, which I think makes it a little more fun to play than the extraordinarily broken ranged swords bard. Of course, we can still use ranged slashing flourishes. This character still has access to ranged weapons at this level, and so when you just want to shoot someone twice in order to do amazing amounts of damage, as swords bards often do, you can just do that. So don't be afraid to fire your weapons in addition to using your to fire your bows in addition to closing to melee damage and casting your spells. This character can do all 3. For our spell selection at this level, of course, we have hit level 2, and so hit level 2 spells, and so we're going to pick up Cloud of Daggers. Again, almost every bard is going to want to pick up Cloud of Daggers. It has no saving throw, and it's just guaranteed damage. It's always good to concentrate on in pretty much every fight, so very few characters are going to skip this. We're also going to replace one of our lower level spells that we're no longer going to use as often, probably in this case Thunder Wave, but this will depend a little bit on your spell selection and exactly what your party has available to it, with Hold Person. Hold Person is even better for this character than it normally is for every character, because we're going to be making a lot of melee attacks. So if you paralyze an enemy with Hold Person, then you get those automatic critical hits against them, doubling your damage even further. So given that we have tremendous damage output, and then we can boost it even further with Hold Person, it's extremely synergistic. It also, just like Tasha's Hideous Laughter, will work with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, which is a very powerful item option that we can use when we get it later on in the game. For our fighting style, we're going to be taking 2-weapon fighting. Now, this is an ability that you may want to respec when you get to the end game, because there's a particular one-handed weapon that wants you to not have a weapon in the other hand, the Duelist Prerogative, that's excellent for this character. And also, once we get our Swashbuckler abilities, we're going to be making attacks mainly with our main hand weapon, so we won't be using 2-weapon fighting as often. Now, you still want to take 2-weapon fighting at this point in the game, because we're almost always going to be using 2 weapons, and even if you don't respec later on, this still won't be wasted, because you'll have a pair of hand crossbows. The offhand hand crossbow attack will benefit from 2-weapon fighting, so it's still very good to have 2-weapon fighting. But later on in the game, when you get your Swashbuckler abilities, you may want to respec in order to swap this to dueling, because at that point you'll be using a one-handed weapon, and thus benefiting from this more than 2-weapon fighting. So your fighting style may change depending on your equipment. We also get to pick up 2 skill expertises, which is great, because again, this character can just be perfect at every single out-of-combat action in the game. We already have expertise in Persuasion and Sleight of Hand at this point, so you can put it in the other 2 dialogue skills, Deception and Intimidation. If you feel like you're making a lot of stealth rolls, then you could put expertise in stealth, and then you'll make those rolls as well, particularly if you have a character in your party that's casting greater invisibility. This is a character that can benefit from that as well, and so you can use the stealth archer or stealth melee character strategy with this character with stealth expertise perfectly also. So either of those two options, again, depending on your party composition. At character level 5, we get our 4th level of Bard, which gets us an extra cantrip. So we're going to take a nice early True Strike to annoy people in the comments. Now, of course, we could take Blade Ward if we want a more defensive choice, or Minor Illusion if our party doesn't have it, Light for utility, but you really can't underestimate the power of Angry Nerd, so True Strike it is. For our spell selection here, we're going to pick up Enhance Ability. Now, typically you're going to avoid spending spell slots on Enhance Ability, but it's nice to have, especially for a character like this who is doing a lot of your out-of-combat rolls. Although there are not that many skill checks that it's worth spending a level 2 spell slot on gaining advantage on, and a lot of those you have friends in order to gain advantage, when you do want this spell, it's really nice to have. So having it available and then just casting it infrequently is the best way to think of Enhance Ability. We also get an additional feat. Now, there's a lot of options that we could take here, and a lot of them would be very powerful. I think overall, the most useful one, though, is just going to be an ability score improvement to boost our dexterity up to 19. Around this level, we're going to get Ethel's Hair and get to 20 dexterity right away. That's going to increase our accuracy and damage relative to the enemies at this point in the game dramatically, and also let us win initiative. As a dexterity character that is getting the initiative bonus from Swashbuckler, we can skip alert on this character, so that kind of buys us an extra feat while still letting us have really high initiative and win initiative throughout all of Honor mode, even against the fastest enemies if we invest in 1 or 2 initiative items as well. There's also a couple other options we could take. I'll talk a little bit more about these later, but Savage Attacker, if you just want to maximize your damage at this point in the game, is also a reasonable choice. If you find that you're just spending a lot of time making melee attacks, Savage Attacker will make them significantly better. Sentinel can let you lock down enemies and protect your allies as well, so both of those are pretty reasonable options, but the extra dexterity is just invaluable at this point in the game, so the most powerful option is the ability improvement. At character level 6, we get our 5th level of Bard and get 3rd level spells. Now, at this point in the game, we still have 16 Charisma. We've boosted our Dexterity, but have 16 Charisma, which is still even with where a lot of casters would be at this point in the game. A lot of casters will still have 16 in their base stat and have taken Alert as their first feat. So we're still able to cast our spells pretty effectively, even if we're not leveling our Charisma as much as another caster character would be doing. We also want to take offensive spells on this character because later on in the game, we'll have other ways to boost our save DCs, so it's very powerful to get extra aggressive spell casting, especially because bards get access to really good offensive spells. We also get Font of Inspiration, so our inspiration dice come back on a short rest, which means many more flourishes every day. For our spell selection here, we're going to take Hypnotic Pattern. Hypnotic Pattern just wins encounters. If you can hit multiple enemies with this, it's just going to end the encounter right away, lock down a whole encounter, wake them up one by killing them, and you just don't have to ever fight an enemy. So this is just an extremely powerful spell. Then, at level 7, we're taking our 6th level of Sword Bard, because at Bard level 6, Sword Bards get extra attack, which obviously is very powerful. This is a slightly delayed extra attack because of our 1 level of Rogue that we took at the beginning of the game, but we have the spell casting to make up for that, and as a Sword Bard, you sort of have built-in extra attack because you have Slashing Flourish, allowing you to make multiple attacks in a turn, so delaying this doesn't hurt us as much as it would on another character that wants to make weapon attacks. But when we get it, it really spikes the character's power level and makes them dramatically stronger. So with extra attack, we've just doubled our damage output. You can use multiple flourishes in a single turn, either multiple slashing flourishes, or you can use one and then a defensive flourish in order to protect yourself for the enemy's coming turn. There's all kinds of different things that you can do when you can mix and match those options. We also get an additional spell at Bard level 6, and so we're going to take Glyph of Warding. Glyph of Warding just gives us so many options because we can choose the elemental damage type, or we can use it to put enemies to sleep, and it's non-concentration, so we can cast this while concentrating on another spell effect like Hypnotic Pattern or Hold Person. This is going to let us use our spells tremendously effectively. Now that we've got extra attack, we want to make even more attacks, so we're heading back to Rogue. At 2nd level Rogue, we get bonus action, the cunning actions, hide, dash, and disengage, which let us do those things as bonus actions. This, of course, is amazing for what is basically, at this point in the game, a caster melee hybrid, both because it lets us reach enemies more easily, and also because it lets us get away from dangerous enemies more quickly. This character can also bonus action hide. We have stealth expertise, so enemies will not be able to find us very frequently. So you can make your attacks or cast your powerful spells and then just melt back into the shadows and enemies won't be able to do anything about it. Cunning action dash, of course, is very powerful as well, so having all of these effects on a bonus action just gives you an enormous number of tactical options and makes this character very hard to pin down. One of the downsides that we have is, although our armor class is really good, our hit points are somewhat low at this point. We've got 14 Constitution and have taken classes that don't have really high base hit points, but our mobility, high armor class, and general slipperiness, as well as defensive flourish to add even more to our armor class, and the fact that we have really high initiative as well, are going to just make this character very hard to kill. So even though on paper we might look a little squishy, in practice that's just not the case. A character level 9, we're taking our 3rd level of Rogue, which of course lets us pick our Rogue subclass. I've already mentioned that we're taking the Swashbuckler. This lets us be even more slippery on the battlefield, of course, because we can deny enemies opportunity attacks, and also gives us a +2 bonus to our initiative. Now, this bonus is based on our Rogue level, even though it's equal to our proficiency bonus, it won't increase any further than +2, but a +2 initiative bonus on a character that has 20 dexterity will be a +7 to your initiative. Even with only one initiative item, which this character is very likely to want at least one particular very strong initiative item, that is plenty to beat even the fastest enemies in Baldur's Gate, and will let you go before the vast majority of enemies in Honor Mode. So we can safely skip Alert because we have this bonus to initiative from Rakish Audacity. It also lets us use our sneak attack more often, which is not a huge component of our damage setup at this point, but the extra 2d6 per turn is still pretty nice, so we're always happy to have more access to that. At character level 10, we're taking our 4th level of Swashbuckler Rogue, which basically gets us an extra attack as a bonus action. Since we're always going to be using a finesse weapon, we always have access to these dirty tricks, and Flick of the Wrist is just a full-on extra attack against any enemy that's using a weapon that also disarms them and gives you advantage on your next attack. So we can attack multiple enemies with Slashing Flourish. We can Dirty Trick Flick of the Wrist to knock enemy weapons out of their hands and do a ton of extra damage, and just constantly make tons of attacks, disrupting what enemies are doing, and as well as outputting excellent damage as a Swords Bard. We also get the bonus action Vicious Mockery, which lets us, in fights that we know we're going to win, just double mock enemies to death. You could use Vicious Mockery as your cantrip, as your action, and then also bonus action cast it with the Dirty Trick, so you can just keep mocking enemies until they fall over and die from the shame of it all. Sand Toss is also pretty useful for this character. The blind lasts for 2 turns, so that is a real debuff. You will use this sometimes against enemies that you can't use Flick of the Wrist against, though that's always going to be your preference because it does more damage and usually inflicts a more relevant debuff, but don't forget that Sand Toss exists. The save DC for Sand Toss is based on your dexterity instead of on your charisma, so it's going to succeed more often than these other two, even though it has lower damage than Flick of the Wrist, so you'll typically want to use Flick of the Wrist. The way that that works is the attack roll is made with your dex, and then the save DC is based on your charisma, so the damage is always going to go through, even if the enemy doesn't drop their weapon. We also get an additional feat, and for this feat, there's a lot of cool options that this character can make excellent use of. So, of course, you could do an ability improvement and boost your charisma up to 18. That's always going to be pretty nice for this character. But there's also a bunch of other really nice options that we could take. Mobile does conflict a little bit with being a swashbuckler, because we already have the ability to ignore enemy opportunity attacks. But you can still benefit from the extra movement speed. This character still just gets tremendous value out of that. Polearm Master can go really well if you're using the Dancing Breeze, if you are playing a race that has glaive proficiency, or if you intend to take Paladin levels, more on that in a second, and thus get martial weapon proficiency. The Dancing Breeze makes an excellent weapon for this character, so you can play as a Polearm Master Sentinel character. It's a finesse glaive, so it will use your dexterity, and you can use the Polearm Master Sentinel combo to get even more control over enemy movements and combat. Another really fun option that I really like for this character is Defensive Duelist. This is a feat I think I've kind of overlooked a little bit, but when it comes down to it, you're basically getting a shield spell that you can cast every single turn. It lets you add your proficiency to your armor class. Now, unlike shield, it only works for that attack, not for the entire turn. And it's only +4 at this point, not +5. So it's certainly worse than the level 1 spell shield. But you get it all the time for free. And as a reaction, that can cause a lot of enemy attacks to miss. So this is a feat that I think is a little better than I initially gave it credit for, and that I've been having a lot of fun using on characters like this that benefit from being able to really harm enemies by causing their plans to go awry. Another great option, and probably the most powerful overall, is to just take Savage Attacker. We're just going to be rolling a lot of dice and dealing a lot of damage, especially if we have Booming Blade, because we're playing a High Elf or High Half Elf, or because we're playing Origin Astarion, having Respect to take Booming Blade. We'll be rolling lots of dice, so re-rolling the damage on those is really good. I'm going to take Savage Attacker here for the example, but I wanted to talk about how many feats there are that are really fun and powerful for this character. You can also get more of those if you're using the Feats at Even Levels mod in order to get a feat every second level, which is a fun way to build this character as well. Or if you just want to use the Mirror to boost your dexterity, and then you can, instead of taking the ASI, you can take another one of those feats. So lots of options here. At level 11, we once again have a bunch of choices. You can certainly just take 2 more Bard levels, you'll get an extra feat. I already talked about how many great feats there are for this character, so that's always going to be a powerful option. If you're not using Ethel's Hair, that'll let you just max out your dexterity, which of course is very good as well. We can also multiclass. There's a lot of 2-level dips that make this character significantly stronger. 2 levels of Fighter gives you Action Surge, as well as an additional fighting style, so you can have both 2-weapon fighting and dueling, or you can have archery to make more powerful ranged attacks, or defense just to give you a little bit more armor class. Another option is to take, and then of course Action Surge is incredible. Another option is to take 2 levels of Wizard. Wizard gets you Booming Blade, it gets you extra spellcasting, and it gets you Wizard spellcasting as well, so you'll be an 8th level caster with full access to the Wizard spells that are available from scrolls. So taking 2 levels of Wizard is great. You can then take Blade Singing Wizard, which will boost your armor class and damage significantly, and just makes the character more mobile and gives you a lot more options as well. This character works very well as a Blade Singing Wizard. I think that the most powerful option overall, though, is to take 2 levels of Paladin. This gets us subclass abilities from Oath of the Crown, which get us Righteous Clarity for extra chance to hit, or from Oath of Vengeance, just for extra damage with Inquisitor's Might. Any of the Paladin oaths are totally fine, but Oath of the Crown is probably the most powerful for these 2-level dips. And it's also going to get us access to martial weapons, which are useful for some setups with this character. And at level 2, we're going to get smites, which obviously are incredible. So that's what we're going to go with for this build. Then, at character level 12, we're taking our 2nd level of Paladin, and we get a ton of awesome stuff from this. So firstly, we get access to Divine Smite, and as a level 6 Bard and level 2 Paladin, we count as a 7th level caster, because Paladin is a half-casting class, which gets us 4th level spell slots. That's the maximum damage that you can do with a Smite, so we have really powerful smites. If you took Savage Attacker, that's going to multiply your smite damage, so obviously increases your overall damage tremendously. It also gives us a fighting style, and so we can take, you can add dueling while keeping 2-weapon fighting, or you can take defense for extra armor class. Here I'm just going to add dueling. We'll be using a one-handed melee weapon, but 2-weapon fighting is still useful for our hand crossbows, which we're going to be using pretty frequently still, even at this point in the game. So I like having both of those. You could also respec in order to get dueling and defense, which is a maybe slightly stronger endgame setup, because the extra armor class is great, especially if you're not using bows that frequently. We also get Paladin spells, which give us yet more super powerful options. Command, of course, is amazing, especially if we're using the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. That's one of the most powerful combinations in the game for a reason. And then Thunderous Smite gives us even more burst damage. Bless is a good spell for this character to concentrate on. We're just making a lot of weapon attacks, so the extra d4 is just going to let us hit much more frequently. Our remaining couple spells are much less important, but we can take, for example, Protection from Evil and Good, still relevant even in a couple fights in the very, very late game, though obviously not your go-to here. And then we'll take Shield of Faith. These spells you're just going to spend on smites or bard spells, so they won't be cast very often, but Command, Thunderous Smite, and Bless are all amazing additions for this character. Alright, my friends, that is the 12th level build. Now, because people really liked this when I did it last time, I'm going to take a second to talk about possible ways you can expand this character if you're using the mod that gives you 20 levels. But that's the end of the build for vanilla Baldur's Gate 3, though of course we can improve the character even further by talking about items, so we'll get to those in just a second. So, as I mentioned, people really enjoyed when I talked about expanding the character to 20 levels if you're using the mods that let you build your characters up to level 20. And obviously there are tons of different ways that we can do that, but I think that the most powerful way for this character is just going to be to take 6 more levels of Bard. That gets you Magical Secrets, which will get you Counterspell, and maybe Spirit Guardians, which can be extremely powerful for a melee character like this. Running around with Spirit Guardians is great, and it also gets you access to 6th level Bard spells, like Otto's Irresistible Dance, which of course are incredibly powerful. But we also want that 6th level spellcasting, because after our 6 more levels of Bard, I recommend taking 2 levels of Wizard. Blade Singing Wizard, as we already talked about, is great for this character, and those 2 Wizard levels will give you access to full Wizard spellcasting from scrolls. So with 6 more Bard levels, you get tons more Inspiration dice, you get to hit 6th level spellcasting, which is obviously ridiculously strong in Baldur's Gate 3, and get Otto's Irresistible Dance. You get a lot more damage as a swords bard in general, just as you level, and we get Magical Secrets for even more spell access. And then with the 2 wizard levels, we can learn every wizard spell that's available in a scroll, as well as get the extra buff from Blade Singing Wizard. Now, obviously, there's lots of different ways that you could finish off the character. You could just go 8 more Rogue levels and go up to Rogue level 12. Getting all the defensive benefits from leveling Rogue is great, and as a Swashbuckler, you get more initiative as you level up as well. You get Panache, which is a kind of fun ability to use, so that's another option you could definitely do. You could also take more levels of Paladin. 8 levels of Oath of the Crown Paladin also gets you Spirit Guardians, as well as all of the defensive benefits that those give you. So those are kind of my recommended ways to expand the character, but honestly, you should be creative if you're intending to do that and play around with those levels, but you certainly can't go wrong with more Sword Bard levels and a couple Wizard levels for Blade Singing Wizard. For items for this character, we have a ton of different ways that we can equip and prioritize our items, and how we're going to want to set up the character's items is going to change significantly over the course of the game, so we're going to have kind of different phases to how we're going to itemize. In the early game, our weapon setup is going to be 2 finesse weapons, 1 in each hand, and usually in Act 1 that's going to be the Knife of the Undermountain King as the best finesse weapon, and the Short Sword of First Blood, which does a bunch of extra damage in your offhand, so that's going to do the most overall damage for the 2-weapon setup. Later on in the game, you may want to replace one of these with Crimson Mischief, or maybe Crimson Mischief and Bloodthirst if you want to stay as a 2-weapon fighting character, but I think that the most powerful way to build the character in the endgame is to transition to using only 1 weapon, the Duelist's Prerogative, This requires you to have an empty offhand, but increases your chance to critically hit, lets you make attacks as a bonus action all the time, and gives you an extra reaction, which this character can use pretty well in order to make opportunity attacks, to use Defensive Duelist if you took that as a feat, and just generally to be annoying to your enemies. So the Duelist prerogative just gives you a ton of great options and is just a very powerful weapon that this character uses. Not a lot of other characters get to maximize the effectiveness of this weapon, so it's nice that we do. This character also makes a great carrier for Falar, either in the early game or especially in the end game once we get our Swashbuckler abilities and can use the bonus action attack with it. So if you need a Falar carrier, it'll lower the damage of this character, but increase the damage of the rest of your party dramatically. So always a viable option as well. And of course, I already mentioned that if you took Polearm Master and Sentinel, the Dancing Breeze, because it's a finesse glaive, counts for all of those things, and you can make bonus action attacks with it using your Swashbuckler abilities to disarm enemies. So this is an extremely powerful way to build the character if you want to set up as more of a control character than just a pure damage character. I don't know why it was so difficult to say that word for me, but we got there in the end, mostly. For our helmet, we're just looking at anything that makes our attacks better. So the Mask of Soul Perception is an incredibly powerful item for this character. We benefit from the attack rolls and the initiative rolls. And then we also do benefit from perception. This character is going to be your trap finder a lot of the time. So even though we have low perception, the bonus to our perception check is actually pretty relevant. But obviously the bonus to attack rolls and initiative rolls is just amazing for a character that just wants to dish out a bunch of damage. Another fun option is the Diadem of Arcane Synergy if you are playing a race that gets Booming Blade, or if you have the ability drain Illithid power, then you're always going to be inflicting a condition for this and gaining Arcane Synergy. We have 16 Charisma, so this is just going to let us do 3 extra damage on every attack, a totally reasonable boost for this character. You can also use the Helmet of Grit, and this is my favorite way to build the character, although it is a little riskier. If you're at half HP with the Helmet of Grit, you get an extra bonus action. We have lots of ways to make bonus action attacks between the Duelist prerogative and being a Swashbuckler. And we have tremendous amounts of other uses for our bonus actions as well, because we can use them to dash, hide, or disengage. You can use them to inspire your allies or cast a healing word. So this character does amazingly well with more bonus actions. We use them incredibly, so the Helmet of Grit is phenomenal for us. For our armor here, you're just going to want one of the medium armors with uncapped dexterity to maximize your dexterity bonus, so the Armor of Agility is going to be your best defensive option. Or, of course, if you want to make the character even more brokenly powerful, the Ballast Armor is always going to be ridiculous. Doubling the amount of damage that enemies are taking from the Duelist prerogative attacks is going to be incredible, and it gives you, again, +2 to initiative, so you don't have to worry about enemies going first. If you're using the Mask of Soul Perception and the Ballast Armor, you will have +11 to your initiative, which is even higher than the +10 that I recommend for winning every check in honor mode. But even with just one of these two items, you will go first pretty reliably, and with the Ballast Armor, the amount of damage you do is obviously absurd. This item's broken, this character's no exception. For our rings, we're just looking again for anything that increases our damage per attack. We're just making a lot of attacks. We'll almost always be concentrating on a spell, even if it's just Bless in the late game, but it will often be things like Hold Person or Hold Monster from a scroll, and so the Strange Conduit ring is going to increase our damage significantly. The Risky ring is pretty good for this character as well, although not without its risks, because advantage on all our attacks just means that we're hitting with our attacks extremely reliably, and that is obviously very powerful. Another ring option, of course, is to use the incredibly strong Helmet of Arcane Acuity and Band of the Mystic Scoundrel combo. This character has Bard spellcasting, including a lot of illusion and enchantment spells, so you can build up Arcane Acuity stacks, which gets you increases to the spell save DCs on those spells. By making weapon attacks, you can build up multiple in a turn with Slashing Flourish. You have bonus actions to build them up even faster. And then you can cast your control spells as a bonus action. You have bonus action Command, Hold Person, and Hypnotic Pattern, and that's going to let you just lock down entire encounters in an irresistible fashion. So again, this extraordinarily powerful item combo works extremely well for this character. For our amulet, there's a lot of different options here. You can build more defensively with the Amulet of Greater Health. That will just give you a lot of hit points. One of the weak points of this character is we have relatively low HP. 89 at level 12 is fine, but definitely could be higher. So if you make it 137, that is going to be a much more comfortable HP total and mean that you won't lose concentration on spells. Amulet of the Devout, in combination with any other save DC item or with Arcane Acuity, can let you land your spells much more reliably even in the late game, so if you don't have another spellcaster using this, it's still great for this character. We also don't naturally get access to Misty Step, so the Amulet of Misty Step is a totally reasonable choice even on into the end game. And I also really like the Surgeon Subjugation Amulet. We're going to be making a lot of attacks, we'll get a lot of critical hits. Paralyzing enemies is really strong, so you can use this one on this character as well. The best overall is probably just the Greater Health Amulet, because the defensive stats are really good, but there's a lot of room for customization here with your amulets. For your cloak, you're just looking for a defensive cloak, so Cloak of Protection, or the Wave Mother's Cloak, thanks to the bug, but my favorite is the Cloak of Displacement. This character actually doesn't want to get attacked, and the Cloak of Displacement discourages enemies from doing that. Enemies who have disadvantage on their attack rolls will usually choose a different target. So between our relatively high AC, because we're a dexterity-based character, and we have other ways to boost our armor class, and enemies having disadvantage on their attacks, they'll often look elsewhere, which will make this character just stay alive for longer to dish out our damage. Remember, we're a hit-and-run character, we're mobile, we're tricky, we don't want to get attacked, we're not a run in and take it on the chin type of character, so the Cloak of Displacement discourages enemies from doing what we don't want them to do. For your glove slot, again, just anything that increases your weapon damage. The Helldust gloves just boost your damage output in both for your weapon attacks, and then also, of course, increase your spell save DCs, which are very relevant for this character. And because they boost all of your weapon attacks, the fact that you're using a pair of hand crossbows, in the late game probably the Hellfire hand crossbow and just a +2 hand crossbow, though you could go with the Nair Misser as well. The extra magic missile can come in handy, and the being force damage can also be useful, although if you're using the ballast armor, then you want to swap to the hand crossbow +2 in order to have it be piercing, because with the ballast armor, you want the vulnerability to piercing damage to actually work. So which two of these three hand crossbows you use is going to depend on your armor. But the fact that you have a pair of hand crossbows can multiply the damage from the Helldust gloves significantly when you fire both of those hand crossbows, and gives you a really great ranged option in addition to your spell casting. So that's what you're going to use for your ranged weapon slot. Finally, for your boots for this character, again, we have a lot of different options. The Disintegrating Nightwalkers are always going to be good, extra Misty Step, and again, this character wants to move a lot around the battlefield, so making certain types of difficult terrain not affect you is really good, and having Misty Step gives you a lot more positioning options. And another boot that's really fun for this character that you don't see as often is the Speedy Light Feet. We have bonus action dashes, so the Speedy Light Feet will trigger pretty frequently, and the lightning charges are really good. We're making a lot of attacks, +1 to attacks and +1 damage, +1 to attack and damage on every attack is very relevant. And if we do get 5 lightning charges by dashing multiple times, the extra D8 of damage is also really powerful. So the Speedy Light Feet can be a pretty nice DPS boost for this character. Finally, the Evasive Shoes are always a great option. Again, more defensive capability on this character is always welcome. We don't want to get attacked, so boosting our armor class with things like this and the Ring of Protection is always going to be good. It's also worth mentioning that this character is excellent at using scrolls. We have, especially if, of course, you're using the helmet and the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel combo to boost your save DCs, then you're going to be excellent at using scrolls, so carrying scrolls like Hold Monster to boost your save DCs, and then bonus action cast those, which does work from a scroll, is, of course, incredibly powerful. So if you're going with this item combo, you definitely want scrolls to support your inherent spell casting. Alright, my friends, that is the Dashing Swordsman, and I hope you have as much fun playing this character as I have, and I hope that it helps you have a blast in your honor mode runs, whether you're mocking your enemies until they just die from the shame, or whether you're just stabbing them until they die from the stabbing. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like, helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.